Hi class, we're ready for lecture 2. We're going to be talking about arguments in this lecture, particularly how to understand them. Another lecture later we'll be talking about how we evaluate them. But let's get started. I mentioned something briefly in our first lecture about doing philosophy, that we focus on trying to understand and evaluate other philosophers' arguments in support of their proposed answers to philosophical questions. So now I want to talk a little bit about what an argument is in more detail. Like the word philosophy, there are many definitions of the word argument. The one I have in mind in class isn't the why are mommy and daddy yelling at each other kind of argument, and it isn't even the sort of civilized debate version of the word argument that you might be familiar with. When I mean an argument in this class, I just mean a main point backed up with evidence. So the formal, slightly more formal definition you see on this slide right here is a main point that we'll call a conclusion, along with reasons that we'll call premises, that are supposed to provide evidence that that main point is correct. So usually you will hear a single person offer up an argument to back up reasons why she believes what she happens to believe, or an argument offered to convince someone else to believe something that they might not currently believe. So I'm just going to give you a somewhat silly example of an argument, just so you have an idea. I'm going to try to convince you that my shoes are awesome. I just got some new shoes. I don't know how awesome they are, but bear with me while I try to convince you of this main point. So that's the main point: my shoes are awesome. And I feel like I can offer two reasons in support of that. One reason is that my shoes look like Converse Chuck Taylor All-Star shoes. They are not Converse shoes. They're actually Airwalks, I believe. But whatever, they kind of look like it. You can see the picture of it in this slide. They would pass for Chuck Taylors, where I come from anyway. And the other reason is that my shoes were cheaper than Converse shoes. I got them at Payless, proud to say. I think I paid like $20 for them, so yay me. So not a terribly interesting argument, but that is an argument nonetheless. It's a main point backed up by reasons. Now, we have a formal notation for how we write out arguments in class, and this is how I'm going to be writing them out in class, and I hope you can just follow suit with me. We label each premise with a P and then number the premises, and we write those premises first. So you see P1, my shoes look like Converse, that is our first premise. Then P2, my shoes were cheaper than Converse shoes, and we keep numbering them depending how many premises we have in a particular argument, however many reasons we have. Arguments can have as few as one premise and as many as thousands or millions of premises. Normally we'll be looking at arguments that have anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 premises. Once we're done writing all the premises, we draw a line separating the premises from the conclusion, and then we indicate our conclusion with the letter C, C for conclusion. We don't have to number our conclusion because arguments only have one conclusion always. And there you see the conclusion to that most excellent argument of mine: my shoes are awesome. That's simply what an argument is. You could think of all sorts of examples about this. I'm sure you've heard other people try to convince you to believe something, to convince you to believe that some movie was good, convince you to believe that the earth goes around the sun, to convince you to believe that they are 72 years old. Whatever, there are all sorts of arguments out there, some main point backed up by evidence. Now, understanding arguments basically amounts to these two steps, and only the first step is what we're going to try to talk about in this lecture today. Mainly, to understand an argument, we just want to figure out which part of the argument is the conclusion, or the main point, and which parts of the argument are the premises, the reasons that back up that conclusion. I added a little part there that says we should try to figure out which parts are neither as well, because for longer arguments that appear in the middle of a long essay or a long reading, Some of the essay itself might not be directly relevant to the argument. It might just be background information or a side topic, a digression that the authors decided to make. And so it's important to distinguish all those characteristics of an essay. Some parts of the essay is where the author is describing her main point. Some parts of the essay is the author telling us what reasons she has to believe that main point. And some parts of the essay are neither of those. They're just somewhat irrelevant side points or explanatory things. Another thing we're going to try to do a little bit later is to figure out what type of argument it is. There are going to be a few different types of arguments we'll be studying. We'll be looking at deductive arguments, we'll be looking at abductive arguments, and depending on what type of argument it is, that might help us figure out how we should go about evaluating that style of argument. But we're going to discuss that later. Let's focus on this first step, figuring out the conclusion, figuring out the premises, trying to distinguish one from the other. Mainly what this is going to amount to when we come to class is converting arguments in what I would consider a normal form, either an argument that you hear someone say out loud, or an argument that's written down in one of our textbook excerpts, written down in paragraph form, essay form, article form. We're going to try to convert those arguments that are just written out normally into that formal premise 1, premise 2, premise 3 conclusion form, that nice notation. I happen to think it's really nice to end a discussion on what the argument is, this whole sort of process of understanding the argument, with a finished product that looks nice and neat in a clean formal notation. That way, when we get to our next step, evaluating that argument, we'll have something nice and neat to work with to evaluate systematically. So what I want to do right now is give you an example, a sample argument in normal form, in regular, sort of everyday written out English, and have us try to figure out which part of this argument is the conclusion, which parts are the premises, and why you think the part you pick as the conclusion is the conclusion. So here's my example. A sample argument. Howard must quack because all ducks quack, and Howard sure is a duck. Ask yourself right now, what do you think the conclusion is? Then ask yourself the more important question, why did you pick whatever part you picked as the conclusion? What made you think that that part was the conclusion and the other parts were the premises? This is going to be the big lesson in this lecture. All right, here is the answer. The first sentence there is the conclusion. Howard must quack is our conclusion. And I think the best way to figure out why that is the conclusion is to look at some of the surrounding words in our argument. This argument obviously has 3 particular sentences. There's the Howard must quack sentence, there's the all ducks quack sentence, and then there's the Howard sure is a duck sentence. It seems to me, though, that the author clearly wants that first sentence, Howard must quack, to be the conclusion, because of that word, because. The word because translates to for the following reasons. When I say my shoes are awesome because they're cheap and they look like Converse, I'm saying my shoes are awesome for these following reasons that I'm about to lay out. And when I'm saying for the following reasons, that indicates to me that I am about to be listing reasons or premises in support of something else. And that means that whatever I just said before the word because must be the thing that I am supporting with reasons. That is the main point that is being supported by reasons. So that word because does a great job, in my mind, of helping me figure out that the first sentence there is the conclusion. And now, just to give us the complete answer, I've arranged this in its formal way. Premise 1, all ducks quack. Premise 2, Howard sure is a duck. Conclusion, Howard must quack.